up to begin the simulcast portion of our program. All right. We will now move on to our chalice lighting. Again from our hymnal by Christine Robinson. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning. In celebration of the life we share together. It's time now for announcements. I imagine somebody has an announcement. I figured Jim would have at least one. Go ahead, Jim. You're muted, Jim.
Thank you. I think we've all heard that. No, you're muted. So we will have our monthly board meeting after service today. And it's open to any member who wants to sit in and observe. And also COVID numbers. I'll say something, and if you want to add to that, Chuck, but okay. We appear to be sort of in a sideways. We went down consistently here for, up until about 3 weeks ago. And now we're kind of in a sideways mode, going a little up, little down, hanging, just a little bit below 20 cases in our 7-county region. So that's where we're at. We'll just see where it goes. And Chuck, do you have any more insights into that you'd like to add?
Yeah, just want to say, don't always trust my projections, but it doesn't look real good as it's going. Statewide, things are starting to head back up. It's a little noisy in the local numbers, and you don't really see it yet. And I had no idea what the cause was of this basically Delta resurge, but what I've read, probably it just has to do with colder weather and people spending more time indoors rather than any new variant or anything new about the disease. It's just more spread. So we'll see where it goes and keep our fingers crossed. Other announcements. Carrie?
I'll be speaking next Sunday, and I'm going to be speaking on the themes or what was it? Notes on the Railway Man. That's a movie that John and I watched a couple weeks ago, and I was just blown away by it. It is one of the most profound movies I have ever seen in my life. If you haven't seen it, please watch it so you can, because I'm basically going to tell the whole story, so I don't want to mess it up for anybody, but it's just, I was looking at our principles the other day, and so many of our church principles are brought out in that movie. It's just something else. There is violence in it, but the violence is not gratuitous. It is necessary for the understanding of the situation.
Other announcements. I'll say our Thursday night discussion group Zoom will meet via Zoom on Thursday night at 7 o'clock. We basically check in and share how our week's going and chat for a bit, and then move on to showing someone will share a TED Talk and we'll talk about it. And I don't know if we have any specific plans for a TED Talk this week or not. But if anybody wants to attend and doesn't have the link, just let me know, or Tony or Rick Phelps or Tom or Patty. One of us will give you, or all of us. You never know.
Jesse,
are there any further announcements?
Jesse, have you got connections here? So
what's that?
To join us?
Yeah.
Connections.
Well, like if you wanted to join us on on Thursday night for the discussion group, you can do that. Or
I
I think
have been emailing with Doug.
Oh, okay. I think he meant to ask whether you're like on our email list or anything.
Carrie just hooked me up with that.
All right.
Okay, great.
Because I'm hoping I'll probably send out a reminder of the Thursday night thing on the email list. So, and I'll send the link out. Anyway, any further announcements? Okay, with that, we'll move on to, I have to check. I think it's time for a reading here. Yes, it is. So our reading today is from our hymnal and entitled, appropriately enough, We Give Thanks This Day. For the expanding grandeur of creation, worlds known and unknown, galaxies beyond galaxies, filling us with awe and challenging our imaginations, we give thanks this day. For this fragile planet Earth, its times and tides, its sunsets and seasons, we give thanks this day. For the joy of human life, its wonders and surprises, its hopes and achievements, we give thanks this day. For our human community, our common past and future hope, our oneness transcending all separation, our capacity to work for peace and justice in the midst of hostility and oppression, we give thanks this day. For high and noble causes, for faith without fanaticism, for understanding of views not shared, we give thanks this day. For all who have labored and suffered for a fairer world, who have lived so that others might live in dignity and freedom, we give thanks this day. For human liberty and sacred rights, for opportunities to change and grow, to affirm and choose, we give thanks this day. We pray that we may live not by our fears, but by our hopes, not by our words, but by our deeds. And with that, it is my pleasure to welcome back once again the deeply insightful and ever delightful Rabbi Rami Shapiro. All yours.
Thank you, Chuck. Good morning, everybody. Welcome, Jesse. I hope this doesn't ruin your experience of the Unitarian Fellowship in Tullahoma. I want to talk today about Hanukkah, which I know is a major concern of all of you. Hanukkah falls this Sunday, next week, a week from today. And, you know, there's not so many of us, and Talkback we'll use to expand the theme, but I'm just curious, what do you know about Hanukkah? Just quick, anybody can just jump in. What's the message? Did you mute everybody? You can unmute.
I like the
I know
blue.
very little. I know very little, and I can spell the name correctly.
Well,
and,
that's oftentimes
that's
better
about
than
as
I
far
can
as
do.
I get. Okay.
Okay. Anybody know the story, or anyone know the?
It has to do with the oil that lasted 7 days instead of just a couple hours, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Your timing is a little off, but Carrie, but you got the general idea. Most people, Jewish people and others who know anything about Hanukkah know that Hanukkah commemorates this miracle, that there was this war against the Greco-Syrian army and a ragtag group of Jewish guerrilla fighters, and the Jews won. But during this period, the temple in Jerusalem was desecrated. And after they won, the first thing they did was to rededicate the temple. And part of the ritual for doing that is to light the menorah, the seven-branched, I forget the English word, I guess when candelabra, thank you very much, the seven-branched candelabra, and it has to burn for 8 days. But they only had enough olive oil for 1 day. If I were in charge, I would have said, well, let's just wait a couple of days, make some more oil so we have enough. But that's not the story. The story is they pour the 1 day's worth of oil in, they light it, and miraculously, it lasts for the entire 8 days of dedication. It's a miracle. And so Hanukkah celebrate, or the holiday is associated with this miracle. And every Hanukkah, the Jews have an 8-branch candelabra called, in Hebrew, it's a Hanukkah, in normally referred to as a menorah here in the US. And there's 8 branches, and then a separate candle holder that is the one that serves the other one. So you light the separate one, and then you use that candle to light the others. There's a big debate, just so you understand how the Jewish mind works. There's a big debate in the Talmud, which is the thousands of pages anthology of rabbinic law from that was codified around 500 in the Common Era. And there's this huge debate whether you light the menorah 1 candle the first night, 2 the second, 3 the third, until you get to 8 at the end, or you start with 8 and you count down, so you know when the holiday is over. You go 8, 7, 6, 5. The rabbis were split over this. They had, verbal battles over this, and in the end, they decided there was no right way to do it. So the custom became, and this is what we do now, you light them from left to right. So it goes 1, then 2, then 3, right? And you're adding a candle each night. But when you put the candles in the menorah, you put them in right to left to honor those who said you should do it 8 down to 1, and then you light 1 up to 8. It was this compromise they came up with. What makes this interesting to me is it's pure fiction. That isn't what Hanukkah was about. That's what Hanukkah came to be about, for reasons that I'll discuss with you in a minute. What Hanukkah was originally about was a civil war. While the story suggests that the Greco-Syrians are on one side and the Jews are on the other side, the fact is it was a civil war between liberal Jews who invited into their lives and into their country modernity, which back then was Hellenistic civilization. They wanted to learn about Greek philosophy and Greek science, and the Greeks, or the Hellenizers, brought sports into the Jewish community. They wanted all of these things. The liberals did. But in opposition, you had the illiberal group, and they wanted none of it. So while the Civil War aspect is largely subdued in the actual celebration of the holiday, historically, it's major. And it's true. So there's this battle, and the conservatives won. And they were led by, their dynasty is called the Hasmoneans, and they were led by the Maccabees. Maccabee is not a real last name. It means the hammer, because they were smashing their enemies wherever they went. And in the end, the Maccabees win. The Hasmoneans set up their government in the country, and they push, for a while, Hellenistic influences out. But they keep creeping back in. And in an attempt to keep them out, the Hasmoneans get more and more violent. We're going to come to that in a sec. Well, actually, let's talk about that now. They become so violent that, decades after having won, they end up creating another civil war that lasts for 6 years. 50,000 people die. This is in-house fighting, a civil war. And the rabbis of the time were they're on the liberal side, and the Hasmonean dynasty is on the conservative side. And so the rabbis, because they had no control over the government, what they decided to do is we can control the holiday and the meaning of the holiday. And so what they did is they invented the story of the 8 days, the 1 day oil burning for 8 days, instead of referring year after year to the Hasmonean victory. You follow what I'm saying? They tried to downplay the victory and make it about a miracle. The original holiday, before it was called Hanukkah, which means dedication, before it was called that, it was called Nicanor Day. Nicanor was the leader of the the Greek Hellenizing forces, and Hanukkah celebrated his death. This is the day he died, and they celebrated that. The rabbis got rid of Nicanor. We don't hear the word Nicanor Day anymore. And they said, no, it's all about the temple and God performing a miracle. And since the rabbis were trying to have a monopoly on God, it sort of served their cause. But keep in mind that it was a civil war between the liberals and the illiberals. So I want to jump from over 2,000 years ago to just a couple of weeks ago. A couple of weeks ago at the Reawaken America tour, okay, which is a MAGA based Christian nationalist kind of thing. Former Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn gave a talk, and in the talk, he had this loaded sentence, which to my ear, especially at Hanukkah time, sounds like Judah Maccabee, sounds like the Hasmoneans, sounds like the illiberal religious fanatics who are opposed to anything liberal, scientific, rational coming in from the outside. He said, Mike Flynn, he said, if we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, by which he didn't mean Hinduism. I mean, he said Hinduism, I might have gone, well, I'm not so opposed to that. But he didn't say Hinduism or Buddhism or Sikhism or Taoism or Judaism or Islam. He had only one religion in mind, and it was Christianity. But there's no such thing. I mean, as a professor of world religions for 10 years, there's no such thing as Christianity or Buddhism or Judaism. There's only Christianities and Buddhisms and Judaisms. The Christianity he has in mind is a very right-wing, illiberal, even I would go so far as to say fascistic notion of Christian identity and Christian nationalism, where the only truth is their truth. So a Unitarian approach, I know Unitarian Universalists no longer identify solely as Christians, but if you took the United Church of Christ approach, or they would reject that. They would, anything on the liberal end of Christianity isn't Christianity. I was once on an interfaith tour in Israel with 6 Christian pastors from the right-wing end of Christianity. And we were driving from Jerusalem, somewhere up north, and we were driving through these Arab villages. And somebody said in the bus, one of the pastors said something very disparaging about Arabs. And, I don't know exactly what I said, but I said, a lot of these Palestinians are Christians, and their Christianity is way older than yours, right? These are Southern Baptists who, come out of the 1800s. These people were around when Jesus was walking in the neighborhood. They have a much more original Christianity than you do. And to a person, they all disagreed. They said, absolutely, you're wrong. They are not Christians. They may call themselves Christians, but a true Christian, they said, would be in line with us. And if you're not in line with us, you're not a true Christian. So that, I think, is the kind of Christianity we're looking at with Mike Flynn and the Christian identity movement and the Christian nationalist movement. It's a very, 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 very narrow understanding of Christianity that I just heard this the other day. Some commentator said their version of Christianity blends Jesus Christ with John Wayne. They see Jesus as a John Wayne character. He's white, he's armed, he's dangerous, he's out to save white women from the encroaching luxury of the non-Christian. I mean, it's very, very extreme. I think what Mike Flynn is calling for is what the Maccabees were calling for in Judaism. Mike Flynn is calling for it in America. The Maccabees were calling for it in ancient Israel. They both want very illiberal, religious dominated theocracies. Well, that's sort of redundant. They want these illiberal theocracies, and that's redundant. You can't have a liberal theocracy. But they want these narrow kinds of government controls rooted in a very narrow version of their respective religions, because that's the only way they can see themselves fulfilling the mission of their country. I mean, there are real parallels between what there's so many different ways to call the Christian right, but the MAGA Christians, the Make America Great Again Christians, the Christianity that they think will make America great again is this illiberal Christianity. There's so many parallels between what they're calling for now, what the Maccabees were calling for then, but also what the equivalent of MAGA Christians among contemporary Jews in Israel are calling for. And the theocratic Jews in Israel, the ones who don't want, just like the Maccabees, they don't want modern science, they don't want modern civilization, they don't want cosmopolitanism in any way. They're looking for a Jewish theocracy under their control, where they define who is a Jew and how is a Jew and all the rest of it. In 21st century Israel, the Maccabees were calling for something similar in 2nd century BCE Israel, and Mike Flynn and his people are calling for it in the Christian context in 21st century America. So the things that we're talking about at Hanukkah time, if we really talk about them at all, are not the miracle of the oil, but the political reality on the ground at the moment. So the Maccabees win, the Hasmoneans win. Over time, and they're in charge for decades, over time they become corrupt. They're a disaster, which again is why the rabbis play down their victory, because they become extremists. They were extremists, they become super extremists. At some point, they have a mass murdering of rabbis because the rabbis were resisting them. So this is what happens, I guess, to these extremist groups. They just become more and more and more extreme until they implode. Maybe something similar happened in the Soviet Union. There's different things you could look at to say, yeah, they get so extreme that they simply collapse under the weight of their own extreme views. But whatever it is, the Hasmoneans finally collapse. The Romans come and take over, and that's a whole other story. But they eventually collapse. But it takes a while. So you could say, well, I'm not too worried about Christian nationalism for the same reason, that they will get more and more and more extreme and they will collapse. I don't have that faith. I don't know if that's something we can rely on. I think that we have to resist that kind of religion, whether it's Christianity here in America, whether it's Judaism in Israel, whether it's the Taliban and extremist Islam in Afghanistan or Iran or so many other places in the Muslim world. I think you have to actively resist. What that means is what I'm going to come to next, and that brings us to the story of Hannah and her 7 sons, which is in the title of my talk. But I think we have to resist. So what does it mean to resist? So this is the opposite kind of resistance, but I'll show you why it works. This could be history. It's certainly legend in Judaism, but Jews take it as history. During this original civil war between the traditionalist Jewish Taliban of the Hasmoneans and the liberalizing forces. And the liberalizing forces are backed by the Hellenizing movement that's taking over the world, the Greeks. There's a story about this woman named Hannah who has 7 sons. And they live at a time when the liberals are becoming so extreme that they actually are part of what triggers the opposite side to violence. The liberals are saying, look, we've got to bring this revolutionary modernist culture, Greek culture, into our society. And the only way we can do that is to break the hold that traditional religion has on the people. So they try to introduce other gods into the temple, and they try to limit Jewish practices. One of them, they tried to stop the practice of circumcision, for example, because they said it was barbaric to mutilate the body of a just born baby boy. They thought it was barbaric. So anyway, they're doing all these things. And then in this story, they come to a village. Hannah is some major figure in the village. They grab her and her 7 kids, and we don't know their ages, but they're not babies. And they bring them into the center of town. They make everyone come around, and they say to the sons, Hannah's 7 sons, we want you to eat pork. And that will end one of the crucial elements of Jewish culture, which is keeping kosher, which includes, among other things, avoiding all pig products. And one after the other, they take one of her sons, starting with the eldest, and they say, eat pork or die. And the kid refuses to eat the pork, and they torture the person until the person dies, but does not eat the pork. And they go through each of her sons till they come down to the youngest. This is all happening in front of Hannah and the villagers. The boys refuse to eat. Hannah is silent. Then the leader of the Greeks comes to Hannah and says, look, we're tired of killing your kids. I mean, we didn't think this was going to happen. You've got one son left. He's your littlest one. We don't want to torture him. Just tell him to just taste it. Just somehow violate the rule and just taste it, and we'll stop. But she refuses, and she's telling, we don't have her actual words that, whoever made the story up didn't write down what she said. But we do have, the story does say that she goes to her little kid and says, better to die than to commit idolatry. For the Jews of that time, in fact, even now it's on the Jewish law books, if someone comes to you and says, in this case, eat ham or eat pork, if you do it, you're doing it in violation of the Torah, right? The 5 books of Moses. And in so violating the laws of the Torah, you're also desecrating the image of God, who is the author of the Torah. So you're committing idolatry. You're rejecting God and worshiping, I don't know if there's another God here involved, but worshiping some other deity or some other ideal. So she takes her kid and says, don't do it. Die like your brothers. And he does. He doesn't do it. And they torture him. And he also dies. And this story has been used for millennia to celebrate the centrality, the power of faith in the face of evil, right? That's how they saw it. What happens to Hannah afterwards, they leave her alone, the Greeks, they leave her alone, but she dies, according to the story, she dies right afterwards. Some people say that she had a heart attack when her last boy died. She had a heart attack and she just collapsed and was dead. Some say that She self-immolated. She burned herself to death in protest. Some say she threw herself off a roof. I mean, no one knows exactly what she did, but she died very soon after this story supposedly took place. When I think about it, if I were in Hannah's place, now I have one son and one grandson. If someone came and took the three of us and took us to, the town square here in Murfreesboro and said, eat this ham sandwich or we're going to kill you. I've never had a ham sandwich, but my guess is I would say something like pass the mayonnaise. I think you have ham with mayonnaise. That's true. Maybe it's mustard. I don't know what it is, but whatever the condiment is, I would just say, okay, give me the sandwich. I'll eat it. And I would say to my son, eat the sandwich. Don't die for pork. And to my grandson, the same. I'm not willing to die or have them die for that. Now, in Jewish law, there are three things you're supposed to be willing to die for. One is idolatry, and that's not simply worshiping another known God. That was expanded to mean violating core commandments that you find in the Torah. The second is committing murder. If the powers that be say, you see that guy, go kill that person, or we're going to kill you. The Talmud says, the rabbis taught, you have to die. And their justification is, you have no idea if your blood is redder than their blood. In other words, if your life is more important than the other person's life, you're not the judge. You can't determine that. So you die rather than kill. And the third category for martyrdom is sexual. If they, I guess, try to force you to rape someone, to commit incest, adultery, if they're forcing you to commit some sexual violation, like that, then again, you should refuse and you should die. So those are the only three categories. So sexual immorality, murder, and idolatry. For everything else, you can just collaborate with whatever the powers are asking you to do. I don't think I would do I would not resist for pork. I hope I would resist if it came to murder or sexually violating somebody. I hope I would have the courage to do that. I hope I would have the courage to tell my son and grandson to die rather than do that. But it's a hope. I've never been anywhere close to being in a situation like that, so I don't know. But I hope that is the case. Why does this matter? Because I'm mixing these ancient things with what's going on now with Mike Flynn. It seems to me that Mike Flynn and the Christians, the Christianity and the Christians he represents, or to whom he was speaking, they're willing to die for their faith to a degree that, I don't know, I'm going to say you and I, but I shouldn't speak for you, but that I certainly lack. Their faith is stronger than mine. And as such, they're willing to die for more things. Now, I did some research about what Christians are supposed to die for. And the only thing Christians are supposed to die for is denying God. So if someone says, like they say to Peter in the New Testament, do you know? And he said, is this your guy? And I don't even know who he is. Just never saw him before. That, from a Christian point of view, is He should have been martyred rather than deny his God. But that's the only thing, right? So if I'm trying to think of it, there's an equivalent to pork in the Christian world from the Jewish side. So maybe gefilte fish, which most people who weren't raised on it think is a horrible tasting fish. It's not, there's no such thing as a gefilte fish. It means stuffed fish. So it's this, I happen to enjoy it, but I don't know anyone else in my family who does. But the only thing that you have to die for is if someone says, deny your God, and you don't. In Islam, it's a little bit different. In Islam, you are martyred if you're participating in a jihad, in a holy war. If you're killed in the holy war, you're considered a shaheed. And the word for martyr in Koine Greek means a witness, a testimony. So you die because you refuse to deny your witness or your testimony of faith in Christ. It's the same. Shaheed is the same thing in Islam. You're denying the truth of Allah as God. So, but they don't talk about someone grabbing you and saying, do X or die, and you should die. Or even someone grabbing you and saying, deny your God or die, and you should die. They talk about it in the context of jihad. And I think, and this is pure speculation on my part, but I think that's because, as far as I know, Islam didn't go through a period of persecution the way Jews and Christians did. Islam grew very quickly and was welcomed by the people either voluntarily or under the sword, but it quickly grew. People found it a real improvement over what they had. And there wasn't this long period of persecution. Now, it's changing today, you might say, but in Muslim countries, you don't have this persecution. What's happening in the Christian right is a blending of martyrdom in the ancient Christian sense of dying rather than denying your God, and jihad, that you're dying in and killing for your God in the context of a holy war. For all of their Islamophobia, many Christians on the right have adopted the holy war. Of course, it doesn't originate with Islam. I mean, holy war has been part of Christianity for a very long time, but they're adopting the language of holy war, which is jihad, and then extending martyrdom simply to someone who is killed in the process of participating in a holy war. So you could, if you're killed while you're trying to kill, you're martyred, and you go to heaven for that. Same as is in Islam. So something is shifting, I think, in Christianity away from the original understanding of martyr. But to bring it all together, I think there are two questions that we have to ask ourselves at Hanukkah time. The first question is, whose side are you on? I know if I were back then, living back in the Hanukkah period, I would be on the the Hellenistic side. I like science. I like logic. I like philosophy. Thousands and thousands of Jews were on that side. There's a whole Jewish community outside of Israel, even then, where the Greek influence was very powerful, and there was no problem. In fact, it created a boom in religious creativity, trying to meld the insights of Greek culture with Judaism. You see the same thing happen in the Middle Ages, where you get Maimonides, the most famous philosopher of the Middle Ages, 1200s, who takes Aristotle and tries to make Aristotle Jewish. So I would be on that side. And that's the side I'm on now, right? Whose side am I on? That's the side I would have been on. Whose side am I on now? I'm on the liberal side. But then how much am I willing? How far am I willing to go to be on that side? Am I willing to die for my side? Am I willing to have my son and grandson die? And of course, I have a son and grandson. That's all I got. So, this would include daughters and granddaughters, right? I don't know how far I'm willing to go. I suspect I'm not, just taking it, dying for your beliefs. I suspect I'm not that committed to having myself or my family die for our liberalism. I'm not happy about that. I'm not proud of that. That's sort of where my mind is going. I'm not sure I have that passion. I suspect that most of you are on the anti-Hasmonean side and stand in opposition to the Christian Taliban and violent Christian nationalism and all the rest of this stuff. But I also suspect that you and I, you like me, may also be hesitant about dying for the Unitarian cause. I mean, I could be wrong. I'd love to hear you tell me I'm wrong and talk back. But if I'm right, that the Christian Taliban in our case, Muslim Taliban kind of, using Taliban loosely, the Jewish Taliban in Israel, my guess is that because of the depth of their faith and their willingness to die for it, they, in the short run, if not the long run, they will win just the way the Jewish Taliban won in the Hanukkah time. They will win now. And that scares me to death. Well, not exactly to death, which is the whole issue. All right, so I'm going to stop there. And Chuck, you can bring everything to a close, take a break, and we'll come back and see what you all think.
Thank you, Rabbi Rami. It should be an interesting talk back.
I'm hoping.
We will close with these words. The blessing of truth be upon us. The power of love direct us and sustain us. And may the peace of this community preserve our going out and our coming in from this time forth until we meet again. So it's right about 11. We'll come back in about 10 minutes, about 11:10, and gather for talkback. And meanwhile, go get some coffee or whatever it is you want. I have my coffee right here.